From AccuWeather.com, this is AccuWeather Daily, a brief host-read article. It's weather news in a nutshell. It's been a dramatic few weeks for weather rescues. Last Thursday, a severely hypothermic hiker from Maine was rescued from New Hampshire's White Mountains after he stayed out overnight hoping to see the sunrise from Mount Lafayette. The New Hampshire Fish and Game Department said they were notified at around 8:15 in the morning on Thursday that a solo hiker was in distress just below the summit of Little Haystack on Franconia Ridge. The hiker, identified as a 28-year-old man, called 911 to report that his limbs were frozen, he was hypothermic, and he could no longer move through the several feet of snow. Temperatures were in the 20s with winds blowing more than 30 miles per hour, and the man's coordinates placed him at an elevation of 4,300 feet. He had set out the night before hoping to see the sunrise from Mount Lafayette, but once he was near the summit of Little Haystack, he encountered deep blowing snow, and he tried to turn back. The hiker ended up around 1,000 feet away from the trail after losing sight of it. Conservation officers and volunteers with Pima Valley Search and Rescue Team set out to find the hiker, and by 10 o'clock were running into intermittent snow squalls. So the Army National Guard was called in to conduct an airlift, but when they arrived at around 10:45 a.m., low visibility prevented rescue. The helicopter crew landed at nearby Cannon Mountain Ski Area to wait for a safer opportunity, while rescuers on the ground spent more than an hour bushwhacking their way to Bittman. Vegetation was extremely thick, and the terrain was steep, making snowshoes a must once rescuers left the trail. Ground rescuers reached the hiker by 1 p.m., at which point he was extremely hypothermic. Rescuers placed him in a bothy bag for shelter and provided warm, dry clothes and warm fluids. The hiker remained sheltered and stabilized with rescuers until the clouds lifted enough for the helicopter crew to return at around 3. The helicopter crew then lowered a medic and hoisted the hiker by 3:15. They immediately transported him to Littleton Regional Healthcare for treatment. And as soon as the hiker was in the helicopter, the cloud cover returned to the area. The aerial rescue saved several hours that ground rescuers would have had to spend carrying him down the mountain on a rescue litter. Now to Sunday, when a day on the slopes in Colorado turned into hours of sitting and waiting for about 170 people suspended high in the air after one of the lifts malfunctioned. A crack was discovered on one of the gondola lifts at Winter Park Resort, which prompted an automatic shutdown with 174 people still on the chairlift. No injuries were reported, but it took nearly 5 hours for all of the stranded skiers and snowboarders to be rescued and brought back down to the ground. The resort is fixing the part of the lift that cracked, but it will need to be inspected before it can be used again. Winter Park Resort remains open with 19 of the resort's 24 lifts in operation as of Monday. And that brings us to a startling statistic. It's a perhaps unexpected consequence of climate change that periods of deep cold now occur more frequently during American winters, despite an overall trend to warmer temperatures year-round. Now, that uptick in cold snaps, along with other possible factors, has been linked to a doubling of U.S. deaths from freezing temperatures since 1999. And that's according to new research published last week in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The findings warrant public health interventions to improve access to warming centers and indoor heating for vulnerable populations. And that's according to research led by Dr. Rishi Wadera, an associate professor of health policy and management at Harvard. In their study, Wadera's team tracked U.S. death certificates for the over 63.5 million Americans who died between 1999 and 2022, with the research showing a 3.4% annual increase in cold-related deaths year by year since 1999. However, the bulk of the change occurred between 2016 and 2022, which has coincided with accelerations in climate change. Now, certain subgroups of Americans are also at high risk of dying from exposure to freezing weather. Older folks are more vulnerable because they're more susceptible to cold weather due to limited thermoregulatory or body temperature response and often have underlying health conditions that weaken them further. American Indian, Alaska Native populations also had much higher odds of dying from cold exposures, as did Black Americans compared to white Americans. Now, that's consistent with people in minority populations too often living in spaces with a lack of home insulation or heat. Besides climate change, the researchers also cited a rise in risk factors such as homelessness, social isolation, and substance abuse as playing a potential role in the increase in cold related deaths. That's all for now. You can find more stories and regional forecasts at AccuWeather.com, and for your local forecast at your fingertips, download the AccuWeather app. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be back with more from AccuWeather.